Hello, everybody. Welcome to Building Writers, supporting the writing process through the upper grade levels from grade 7 to 12. I am Ruth Rumack, and I am very pleased to be here this evening and to introduce you to, drumroll please, Paula Schultz. Hello, Paula.
Hi, Ruth. It's so nice to be here tonight.
I am so glad that you're with us, and we're going to have this chat all about the challenges that we see with writing going from middle school to high school. And we see things when demands increase and the focus is on the final product rather than the writing process. Tonight, we are here to share ideas. We're going to share strategies. We're going to share tools, lots and lots of tools. And what we really want is to give you the fuel in order to help you support the ones that you love and the people that you are working with or that you have in your household. So a little bit of administration first. We will be recording this performance this evening, and we will be making that available to everybody after tonight's webinar. As well, we would love to take your questions. Thank you so much for anybody who sent in their questions ahead of time, because it gave us a chance to look at them and to make sure that we worked all of that information into the webinar. And for those of you who didn't get a chance to send in your questions, no fear, we will leave some time at the end. So as you have questions, put them in the chat and I will go through them at the end as well. A little bit about us. Let's talk about us, shall we? Well, let's talk about me first. Why not? Ruth Rumack, that's me. I am the founder and executive director of education at Ruth Rumack's Learning Space. We are an academic support center. We work with students as young as age 3 all the way through to the end of high school, as well as students in the university age range as well. I would say that our claim to fame is the fact that we work one-on-one with students and in small groups. We create our own resources, our own curriculum. We have a very multimodal and multi-sensory approach to our learning. We like to get our kids active. We like to attach the movement and the brain and the activities and the curriculum and put it all together and really make it engaging, dynamic, and fun. So enough about us right now. Let's go on. Let's talk about writing in these upper grades. And Paula, what are some of the common challenges that you see when you're instructing writing to those upper grade students?
So the first thing is that as students move into the intermediate and senior grades, grade 7 and up, we see the writing expectations become much more complex. So we go from the informational and creative and reflective writing that students are doing and expected to know how to do at this point, and we're adding persuasive and analytical writing on really complex topics, and the expected volume increases substantially too. So in addition to the writing demands, students are balancing all sorts of demands that impact their executive functioning skills. So we move to a rotary system. We have perhaps more extracurricular demands on our time. We have the introduction of midterms and final exams. And so those challenges impact everything, including how a student tackles a multi-step writing project. If they're struggling with executive functioning, it's going to impact that project.
And that doesn't even mention marks or the acquiring of marks.
That's right. So marks become so important in the upper grades. And so our students become very product oriented. But we know that writing is a process. Students really start to feel the pressure to catch up on perhaps skills that they've missed during the pandemic. And they're also feeling the pressure to achieve really high grades for post-secondary entrance. So students who are stressed about finishing a writing assignment are often reluctant to engage fully in each stage of the writing process, and they just want a finished product.
They just want to get to the end.
That's
and
right.
I think you are absolutely right. And I've seen it in my own students as well, that writing process gets pushed aside. So I think that's our main theme for this evening, is writing process, that it is a process and not a race to the finish line. So let's break down the steps involved in that writing process, according to us, and why it's so important, why that process and having that roadmap is so important.
So I would say that, first of all, students really need to understand the assignment before they can do any writing. So they really need to understand what is being asked of them. They need to know what the final product is meant to look like, and they need to know what steps are involved in creating that product.
Absolutely. So, okay, what do they need to know and what do they need to do?
Yep, exactly. So often students will read the assignment instructions once and then never revisit them again. So one strategy that we use is to make an assignment checklist.
I love that. Can we show an example of that?
Sure.
Let's do it.
All right. So let me share from, so this is an example that we use in our Power Planners curriculum and when we're working one-to-one with students. So we might go through a sample assignment if the student has one of their own that they're working on, or we might give them a mock assignment, and we will read it together and we'll look at what are the products that you're being asked to do, what's the important criteria of this assignment. And then based on the criteria we identify from that assignment, we're going to create a checklist. In this case, the assignment is a persuasive speech checklist, and we're going to have that divided into categories. So first we have to pick the topic, and this is some of the criteria. And this gives a student a sort of at a glance source for when they're working on that project, and they can make sure that they are accounting for each of those expectations. And we also want to add something about what's unclear, what's still confusing in the instructions, what questions do you have for your teacher? So we might put a little sticky note on there saying, here are my questions for Mr. P about that persuasive speech assignment.
I wonder how many people listening to us tonight are thinking, or maybe are connected with the idea that students don't read it. They don't read the assignment sheet. They may have listened to it once in class. The teacher may have explained it, but when you actually sit down and say, so what do you think you need to do tonight? Or what is it that the assignment is asking you to do? Usually we get kind of a blank stare. And this is something that parents can definitely do at home. Take the 10 or 15 minutes to read through the guidelines out loud. I know this is like tricky territory when you're working with teenagers and preteens, but to read it out loud with your child and to start that conversation, which is, oh, this is a really interesting topic. Get the children engaged in the topic, maybe share your experience about that topic or relate it to something that they've already experienced, getting them to, activate their prior knowledge.
Absolutely. We definitely need to understand the assignment and just be thinking about the assignment before we rush to put something to the page, and thinking about, why is it relevant? What do I already know about it? What do I want to say about this? And so once we've done that with our students, we can start to break that down into chunks and figure out what we need to know first in order to get the thing started, and then break down each stage of the process. And once you've done that, you want to check in on the stages of the process. So you want to add those mini deadlines to a Google Calendar, perhaps, or if you have a calendar on the fridge. In my family, we have everybody's everything on a calendar on the fridge. So we maybe want to add those deadlines there so that we have a visual cue, we have a reminder of what's coming up. And for some students, that might be a digital piece that's keeping them organized. For some students, it's pen and paper. I have a lot of students this year who, I don't know if it's because everything went online and they've got digital fatigue, but I have a lot of students who are saying those digital notifications aren't doing it for me anymore. They're so easy to ignore. I have so many of them. So they're going to things like wall calendars and colorful sticky notes and that sort of thing. So I think it's important to find a system that works for your child, but we can definitely support them with that.
And it sounds like what you're talking about is not just the writing process, but we're really talking about practicing executive functioning skills and creating a whole foundation for breaking things down, as you said, into chunks, using things like color coding, using things like the tools that we have available, whether they're digital or not. And I'm so glad to hear that students are going back to writing things down, paper and pencil. That's old school. That's where I come from. I just love crossing something off a list or checking off my checklist of the things that I need to do. So that warms my heart. I'm glad we're not only digital all the time. Okay. So I want to talk a little bit about reading the book or doing the research. Let's just dive into that a little bit, because how often, and if we could, see our audience out here, we could say hands up, how many people have sat down to, talk about this thing with the student and they haven't actually read the book, or they have no idea where to find the research or something like that. So we have to go back to that starting point as well.
Absolutely. And I think that's also an important part of when we break down that assignment, that's part of that process. And we have to account for enough time and enough wiggle room in that to read the book and to really get familiar with that content, because we can, we're going to talk about brainstorming and organizing and how to keep your writing organized. But if the ideas aren't strong, no graphic organizer in the world is going to help with that. So we have to really understand the content that we're writing about before we start writing. And again, similarly to the executive functioning tools, reading can be done in many ways, right?
Yes.
So if we have students who are struggling with reading, we can encourage them to use an audiobook and sit with the text in front of them with the audiobook playing. I know a lot of students want to just have the audiobook playing in the background and do something else, but we really encourage students to have the book with them, and that sort of frees them up to make highlights or put sticky notes in the text as they're reading. There are digital copies of the text, so there are lots of ways to engage with the text and find the right format for the student.
I want to add to that also that there's a lot of research behind students who struggle with reading when they are reading the text with their eyes and listening to it read by someone else, whether it's digitally or writing, hearing a human person read it out loud in front of them. It actually increases their fluency, because the connection between the brain, what they're seeing, and the words that they're seeing make a connection, even if they're not sounding out those words themselves or figuring out those words, but it does increase fluency. So I highly recommend it. And you have to find the thing that works for the student, that is going to be time efficient, but also, low on the frustration threshold.
Absolutely.
So, okay. Once the student has a clear understanding of those expectations for writing for that task, what is the next step?
Pre-writing. So we've been talking a little bit about this, but we're starting to move toward putting things down on paper, but not yet drafting.
This is probably, I think, the most important step, but it's the one that everybody wants to skip because it feels inefficient. It feels like, well, why am I doing all this work now? And it's taking my time and it's wasting my time. I'm not actually getting to the writing part.
Yes. Absolutely. And I see this all the time with students, going back to that idea that, there's stress. This can be anxiety producing, and we want to get to that finished product. But the pre-writing stage is really important in order to create a good final product, a great final product.
So let's break it down. What exactly do we mean by pre-writing? Because there are a lot of skills in that.
So pre-writing is really everything we're doing to get ready before creating our first draft. So that could include, as we've discussed, understanding the assignment, choosing a topic if there's some choice involved, and then maybe research, and then the brainstorming and organizing of the ideas.
I love that. Okay. I'm going to go on to the next point, actually. Let me just go back to my points just to make sure we don't forget anything. All right. How do we support kids with the pre-writing? I mean, what do we do? What do we do here at Ruth Remax Learning Space that we can share with parents?
So getting ideas out, the brainstorming part is the first step of that writing process when we're starting to record ideas. But again, anxiety can really stop a student from knowing where to start with that. Some people are very daunted by the blank page, and so tackling the writing prompt can be tricky. So this does not need to be done sitting at a desk. That's one thing that we do. We take it away from the page, away from the screen a lot, and make it active. So turning brainstorming into an active process can really help students who feel daunted by that blank page.
I agree. So let's talk about some of the things that parents can do to support this idea of brainstorming without it being sitting down at the desk with a paper and pencil or at the keyboard when you're just staring at the blank page.
And, we've all experienced that. That's one thing that, I talk about with my students is that is not just student writers who experience that. We've all felt daunted by the blank page from time to time. But 4 things that parents can incorporate right now that are easy: go for a walk and chat about the topic. It doesn't have to be sitting down and hammering out ideas right away. We need some time to process. So go for a walk, chat about the topic with your child, set a timer and do a brain dump using a voice memo tool. Toss a ball back and forth to generate ideas. I have a student that I work with who just loves the ball toss brainstorm. I think it really frees him up. Similarly, for an older student, you might throw some magnetic darts around or shoot some hoops or incorporate some sort of physical activity that is appealing to the student. And we have lots of ideas in the handout that parents will get. We've added some great tips, so you can look out for those tips in your handout.
Yes. Now, let's not think, though, that this skill can only be practiced when an assignment is looming. These skills can really be practiced at any time. And you can practice that idea of brainstorming or coming up with ideas on a certain topic when you're sitting at the dinner table. You could be in the car. You could toss out a topic and take turns giving the pros and cons. I think if we set our kids up with the structure, like foundation skills around brainstorming and around getting your creative juices or your idea juices flowing, it is easier for them when they have to sit down and do it for something that is specific.
Yes, absolutely. I think if the more consistent low stakes practice that a student has with writing and with this whole process of writing, then the less intimidating the process becomes. And we can do this in a gamified way. So there are lots of games that encourage brainstorming. So we could play categories or would you rather. We often will do would you rather questions, and they can be zany, like would you rather eat pierogies for the rest of your life or never again, this kind of thing. Word association, just to kind of, with brainstorming, we really encourage students to think about the idea that it doesn't have to be right. We just have to get the ideas out. So things like word association are great for that. And things like headbands, where we have the card on our foreheads and the other person has to give us clues where we guess what's on our forehead, that one. These kinds of games can really free us up and remind us that our first idea doesn't have to be our best idea.
You know what? You should see, I'm talking to the listeners out here, you should see what we do at Ruth Max Learning Space to get those ideas flowing. And you'll see all kinds of things in all kinds of forms, formats, modules, as well as, kids sitting on the floor doing activities, or as we said, bouncing balls or running around on even a relay race, trying to get these ideas going. So we've determined, okay, we know what the assignment is asking us to do. We've had casual conversations about it, and now we're moving on to the brainstorming and the organizing. So what suggestions do you have for capturing these ideas so they don't just go out into space?
Yes. And, it's funny you say going out into space, because students can get frustrated by this. I just came up with all these ideas and I forgot them. So we need to find the output method that works best for your child in terms of capturing those ideas. Some students are really adept verbally, but they find the physical act of writing challenging. So for students with graphomotor challenges or dyslexia or working memory challenges, parents can scribe for their child or get them to talk into a phone and use a voice record feature, or use voice typing to record those ideas. You can make it fun with colored sticky notes and special pens for students who prefer pen to paper tasks, or you can take advantage of assistive technology tools.
I think let's not underestimate the enjoyment factor, or at least the neutral factor, right? We want to keep our kids from being frustrated. We want to keep them on task, especially when we're working with kids that have attention and focus challenges, reading challenges, written output challenges. These are all things that will really increase that anxiety. So let's talk more about those tech tools. And I'll say, before we get into the details of it, a lot of parents ask me, what if we're using a tech tool, isn't that like a crutch? Isn't that they're never going to learn how to do it on their own? And my general answer is, it is usually a combination of many things that give the student the the tool or the support that they need. And they may use it for a little while and they may gain that skill and then not have to use it again. Or they may use it in a certain situation, but not in another situation where they feel more confident. So it's not an either or, one or nothing kind of thing. It really is, at Ruth Max Learning Space anyway, we keep it very fluid. So somebody may be using one tool in one situation and another tool in another way. But let's share some of our favorite tools.
Sure. So the first thing I think it's important for parents to know is that the tech tools can be quite simple to incorporate. So you don't need to be a tech expert in order to use these tools. So one very simple tool that I use with my students all the time is the voice typing feature in Google Docs. And the other nice thing about the voice typing feature is that it frees the student up. It works on the independence. We don't have to be dependent on someone else to write or type our answers for us if we're using Google Voice typing. So I'll just show you a little demo of how that works.
And while you're doing that, I'm going to say it's not just for students. I use voice typing all the time. I think now that, it's on our phones and we can just talk into Siri and tell Siri what to do or talk and type, it's much more common, but, we use it in the office all the time, not just with our students.
Absolutely. So it's embedded into Google Docs, which is nice. There's nothing to really set up. So you go to your tools. I've already done this. So you can see that the voice typing feature has popped up. But if I've got a blank Google Doc, I'm going to go to my tools. I'm going to go to voice typing on that menu. And then this microphone is going to pop up and you can see that it's gray. So it's not currently turned on. But if I click it, it's going to turn orange. And you can see that it is recording everything I say as I say it, period. So this takes a little bit of getting used to, but a lot of students really find it quite valuable and it's pretty intuitive and easy to use. And then as they get more accustomed to working with it, you can get a little bit more sophisticated with it. So I'll show you an example of what I mean. If I'm taking a quote, a poem or something, I'll show you how you can kind of use those commands to work on things like punctuation and capitalization. These poems were taken from History for Kids, period. Select History for Kids. Capitalize that. Italicize that. Resume. Both poems are about the ancient Egyptians. Period. Select both. Capitalize that. Resume. So we can see that it has a lot of flexibility, and once students have learned how to use it in a simple way, we can add some complexity so that they can be adjusting things like capitalization, punctuation, all those writing conventions.
And I think that is where we can assure parents that using the tool is not taking away from the necessity to understand the grammar rules or the punctuation rules, in that if we're training our kids properly, then we're training them to use those tools in the right way from the beginning. And we're not relying on the computer to do all of that checking for us at the end. We have knowledge of how to do it. And
Absolutely.
It's so exciting. I love it in action. I just love it.
Yes. So another tool that students can use with all the steps of the writing process, including the research stage, is Read and Write. So students in the TDSB actually have access to this tool through their TDSB accounts. Sometimes it's just a matter of activating it, but I'll show you how that tool can be used for research purposes. This is from our assistive technology webinar. So this is my colleague, Catherine, the amazing Catherine, talking about how to use this tool.
Some of you may know her from our assistive technology webinar that we did last time. And if you want more information on that, then go back to our YouTube channel and search it, because it was full of tools. This is just a smattering, just a small little taste.
The highlighters in Read and Write are a fabulous way for students to stay organized while completing research. We often suggest that students choose a color for each idea that they may have or are trying to prove. As they go through the article, they can highlight based on those colors. And I'll show you how it's done. So first, we select the text that we want to highlight and then choose a color. It's very simple. You can imagine that these are all different ideas. And lastly, I'm going to do this one green again so you can see what happens when I collect them. So the collect highlighting tool is right here, and you simply click on it, and you can choose to sort the highlights by color or position. I'm going to do color today. You can also choose which colors to collect. So if you wanted these in different documents, you could do so. Once you hit OK, a Google Doc is going to be created for you with your highlights collected, the URL for the website so that you can always access it in order to create your bibliography, and the account with which it's placed this document. So it goes within the Google Drive of this account. As you'll notice, my two green highlights have been lumped together. So if those were both about one idea, I'd be able to easily access that information.
Oh my gosh, I just love this feature. I mean, we've been using it for years, really years. And when it first came out, it was mind-blowing. And when I show parents who have never seen it before or students who have never seen it before, it's still mind-blowing. The fact that you can color code it, click the button, everything jumps together, and then, ooh, guess what? You have paragraphs practically sitting there waiting for you just to connect them and to put all of those thoughts together. So I love this feature.
Yes, it's a fabulous feature and I use it myself. You know, we talked about that these are not just tools for students. I've used this myself since coming to RRLS, where I started using it with my students and saw really the value of it. Another great tool when we start to get into the brainstorming and organizing stage of writing, a lot of our students use inspiration. And I know that Kira talked about inspiration in the primary junior writing webinar, which is also on our YouTube page, or will be soon if it isn't already. In high school, another great tool that we can use is Mindomo. So Mindomo is a tool that we can use to create mind maps on the computer and then transform them into a graphic organizer or an essay outline.
Oh, I love that. Are you going to show us that too?
I'm going to show you. Actually, one second. I'm just going to minimize that slideshow.
One of the things that I like about this idea of taking your brainstorm, which is a mind map, you know, you could think about it as pieces of the puzzle, and then clicking that button and it turns into the organizer or essay outline view, is that it works for both kinds of brains. Also, different learners like different views. So some people like to see everything scattered and building off of each other, bubbles and arrows and all sorts of things. Other students find that very overwhelming or too confusing, and they prefer a linear look. And this gives you the option of doing both and flipping back and forth between them. And then once you do get that fantastic essay outline view, again, you're off to the races. Like your essay is practically going to write itself by the time you get to that stage, if you filled it in with enough detail.
Absolutely. And I'm just going to show you a tiny taste of this tool. It's super flexible. There are a lot of templates already built into it for all sorts of different things, or you can create a template, you know, custom design your own template. But for example, we work with students on what we call APE structure: argue, prove, and explain. Some schools call this point proof comment or point proof explanation, but the idea is that you're making your argument and you're supporting it with a proof and then an explanation that ties it back to your big idea. So we can use the Mindomo template if we're arguing the big idea that cats make better pets than dogs, which my two felines at home would agree with, I suspect.
I'll argue that point, but you know, another day.
And so, for example, I might say that, cats are low maintenance. We don't have to take them for walks. And then I'll put in the rest of my arguments, they're affectionate or whatever it is, playful. And then when I've created my arguments, my proofs, and my explanations in the mind map format, I can then go to this menu and click View as Outline. And this is the feature that you were just talking about. So this is going to change it into it's essentially an essay outline, and I can still get in there and adjust that text. So compared to dogs, cats are very low maintenance. And then I'm going to give my proof, etc.
So I think that, that's another piece of the puzzle in terms of creating these mind maps or the essay outline, is that it doesn't have to be entirely finished. You can leave spaces and then realize, it also helps you realize where you need more proof and where you don't. If you don't have something organized and it's not in a visual way that you can refer back to it, it's very difficult to know what you're missing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's actually the next stage of the writing process that we're going to talk about.
Let's do it. All right. Last
Organizing.
tool. Yep. Last tool.
Okay.
So we've come up with a graphic organizer mind map. It really leads into this idea of organizing. So let's hear it.
Okay. So like you just said, organizing is really crucial. Organizing your ideas is really crucial to writing a well-written essay. It's another step that students want to skip. They just want to jump to the drafting. But if we don't organize an essay first, the writing can become disjointed or repetitive or go off on tangents. And again, this is true for all writers. Not to say that, things can't change during the drafting and revision process, but we need a map to follow, especially if we get stuck, right? It's one thing if the writing is flowing nicely during the draft, but when we get stuck and we're not sure where to go next or how to connect ideas, it's really important to have a framework. And the framework that's provided by an essay outline allows students, like you said, to put the ideas in that they already have, and then come back to them to develop them.
I love it. I think it's very important for a student to see what they're missing.
Yes, absolutely. And another thing that an organizer can help with is this anxiety that writing can provoke. So if students are feeling anxious about the deadline, sometimes they're trying to fill space to achieve a word count instead of to prove a point. But it's important for them to know what they're trying to prove with their essay. So we use organizers and outlines to help students keep those ideas organized. And I'm just going to show you an example of what an essay outline might look like. So this is on the left-hand side here, our APE paragraph. So we're putting those APE chunks into a paragraph to support a big idea. And then when students have solidified that process, then we can start creating an essay and really keep those ideas organized. So we've got we'll build a thesis statement first, and then we're going to organize the ideas that we're going to use to support that big idea.
It reminds me of a student I was working with recently, actually, who's a university student, and she becomes overwhelmed with the amount of information at the university level very quickly, not because she doesn't understand the material, but because there's so much of it and she has so much to say. And so when we work together and we can use that simplified version of an organizer, it keeps her focused. And when she starts to go off tangent, we say, okay, wait, let's come back. And does it fit any of these 3 categories or 4 categories? And if it doesn't, then she puts it on a separate page for later, or in case she needs it for something else. But at least this keeps her, from going down that rabbit hole, really.
Absolutely. And I think, for students who maybe will go off on tangents or go down the rabbit hole or maybe overwrite, it's helpful for them because it gives them a structure. And but I find it can also be helpful in the other way of students who are really daunted by this idea that they have to write 1,000 words. Well, right now, you don't have to write 1,000 words. You just have to write some point form ideas in this outline. And so it can work for both types of writers.
Yes. And you know what else I really like about the writing process and when we're teaching how to create that essay is when we use a color-coded system where
Mhm.
there's a certain color for your thesis statement, a different color for your arguments and proofs. I mean, we see this in our power essay programs, and we've incorporated it into all of the programs that we've created for that reason of those visual learners and those learners that need to have that very clear roadmap. It makes it easy for them to recognize where they are in the process.
Absolutely.
Okay, now we have students have generated their ideas, they've organized them into a planner. Let's get to the writing, which is, as we said, the thing they want to do most. Paula, how does a student begin writing their first draft?
So first of all, we want to keep that outline handy. A good outline really provides that roadmap that we were talking about, and that's especially helpful when a student gets stuck. So we don't want to throw that out. We want to really keep that handy and make use of all that great pre-writing work we've been doing.
Can I just say, how many times have we spent all this time on a fantastic outline, and then the next time we see the student, they don't bring it, or they haven't looked at it for a week, and they're looking at us like, well, where do we begin? And I say, well, you go back to the work that we did last week, and we'll find it. And when they do, they're like, oh man, this is good. Yeah, I had some really good ideas here. So
Mhm.
okay. So we've broken it down. We're breaking the process down into these manageable chunks. And once you've used your mind map, you can turn it into that essay planner. Like I said, your essay practically writes itself.
Yep, absolutely. And in fact, I had that experience with a student this week where, the student had been working on an outline, and when we took it and put it into a Google Doc and just removed the placeholders, she went, "Oh, wow, it's basically done." So it's pretty neat. Now we're going to talk about revision in a minute. So let's not kid ourselves that the draft is the finished product, but
Right?
really
No.
it does get us a lot of the way there.
Yeah.
So the other thing that I would say about that, because we're coming up to revision and we've got some stages after drafting, is don't leave the first draft writing to the night before it's due. Sometimes, anxiety-based procrastination, we're thinking, and some magical thinking around what we can pull off in one night. We want a backwards plan to build in time for revision and editing. So for instance, a student might write one body paragraph each day over the course of 3 days, rather than trying to sit down and bang out the entire essay in one sitting, because that can become overwhelming very quickly.
I think this is one of the biggest takeaways for students when they've gone through the process with us and we've held their hand in some way and given them that process step by step, that when we go back to reflect, looking at how we manage the time is the thing that becomes the game changer for them, along with all of these other tools. But just knowing that they're not going to be staying up till 4 o'clock in the morning to get that essay in at the right time. So when we sit down to write something, how can we show students what they're aiming for? How can we give them, incentive to get to that next step?
So I think modeling is incredibly important when we're teaching the writing process. Students really need to understand the structure and the style of what they're aiming for. But, if we are teaching math, for example, we wouldn't put a set of problems in front of a student without modeling how to attack them.
Yeah.
And so when we're teaching writing, we need to be doing that same kind of modeling. So if the teacher has provided exemplars, I will read through them with the students and we'll talk about our observations. What do you notice about the structure and the style of this piece, and how does that relate to what the teacher has asked you to produce? Sometimes we'll make lists of criteria for a particular piece of writing based on those models. And we can bring our attention to some of the more complex aspects of intermediate senior writing, like tone and diction and sentence variety and that sort of thing. So it's really important for a student to know what they're aiming for. And when we are working with students one-to-one or in small groups, we do lots of modeling first. So if we're working on a persuasive paragraph structure, we might choose a topic to work on together, either in the one-to-one or the small group setting. And we're going to co-write a paragraph on that topic first. And then I might ask the students to pick a new topic and write it independently based on what was just modeled. And then maybe at home, they're going to do another one to see how they're applying that process without support. So
This is
we're
the scaffolding that we're talking about,
that's
which
right.
is really small steps getting comfortable mastering that step and then adding the next step with support, with guidance, with feedback, all of those pieces. Now, in the school setting, when you've been asked to write your 1,000 word essay, your grade 11 essay, you won't necessarily have all of that with you for that particular essay, but parents can support that at home by bringing in some other examples. And that's, again, where I like to go in color code. I like to get in there with my highlighters and circle things and show the students where, what makes a really great transition line or something like that, so that when they get to that point, they can use it as a guide. Okay. So we mentioned about the revision process. How can parents support that stage of the process? Let's talk a little bit more about that.
So revision is the step that's going to take your writing from good to great, but to analyze your own writing can be really challenging. A student, they know what they meant. They know what they meant or intended to say. And so revision is about looking at whether that's clear to your reader and how we can make that better. So this is something that parents can really help with, but we want to be careful not to do the work for them. It can be really tempting to rewrite a passage or to put words in the students' mouths, but there are definitely other ways that we can help our students develop those skills.
I cannot agree more. And I'm reminded of a student a long time ago who worked with us for many, many years for different reasons or at different points in his life. And mom was in her former life an editor, and she really knew what she was talking about. And she was a great writer. But, her plan at that time was to take his writing, whatever he'd written, he would leave it on her desk at that night when he finished. And then her job was to look at it. And what she did was rewrite it and then put it back on his desk in the morning. And, after a few years of this, I said, hey, we have to take a step back, because our students are not going to learn the skills that they need if we keep changing or correcting their mistakes for them without giving them any reasoning or taking them through it step by step. So I'm definitely not saying that we shouldn't be constructively critical of our students' work, but we do have to give them an explanation as to why that sentence might work better somewhere else. But let's talk about the language of that. What kind of feedback can parents give that is not doing the work for the student, but is guiding the student?
So first of all, I would say you want to catch them doing something good before you launch into the critical. This is something I try to do with my students all the time, because a lot of students who struggle with writing have had really bad experiences with writing feedback. And it just feels like a slew of, red marks on the page. They see feedback as primarily negative. I had a middle
they're not
grade.
going to share. They're not going to share if they feel that they're going to get defensive and they're going to get frustrated and they're not going to want to hear it.
Absolutely. I had a middle school student a few years ago who was working on written expression, and he really lacked confidence in his writing. He had a really wonderful classroom teacher, and we were collaborating. I was collaborating with the teacher to support the student, and the teacher had provided some comments on the student's draft in Google Docs, and many of the comments were really positive. They were about what this student was doing really well. But when we opened the doc in our lesson, the student's immediate response was, "Oh no." And he saw this list of comments, and he assumed that all the comments were corrections or they were about something that he was doing wrong. And so I think it's really important to point out what your child is doing well, because when we know what we're doing well, we can do more of it. And so, for example, we can say, "I really liked how you backed up your argument with this example," or "I really like how descriptive this part is. It really helps me understand your big idea."
I think that's so bang on. So if we've determined what our students or child is doing well, how can we help them to improve their writing? Because we still have to point out the parts that aren't working. How do we offer that constructive criticism that's not going to set the child off?
So I think we need to ask questions as opposed to giving solutions right away. So get your child to explain their thinking and help them to understand your response as a reader. So for example, you could say in the second body paragraph here, I'm really not clear on how this quote relates to the argument you're trying to make. Can you explain your thinking? And really first, even before they're going to go back in and rewrite, just talk about what they were thinking. Or, where could you add some more transition words to this paragraph to really help me understand that you're moving from one idea to the next? So it's important that we're asking questions to get the student thinking critically about the piece that they've written.
Yeah, I like, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, I really like to get excited, when we're having that conversation, when the child is explaining their thinking and they come up with a really brilliant idea that they haven't put down in their writing. I make a big deal about it. I'm like, wait, that's it. Say that again. And then either I write it down so they don't forget, or we use one of those tools, the voice recording, etc. But somebody to validate that you're on the right track, I think is very empowering.
Yep. Absolutely. And if it's not coming, right, just tell me more sometimes. Tell me more, because sometimes as students, I find, have difficulty with the elaborating or the explanation stage, because they feel that the proof they've given is self-evident and
it's enough.
Why do I have to explain it? So just getting them to tell me more about it sometimes, and putting that down on the page, and then we can look at, what's the best explanation here. And, I don't want to give the impression that this is easy. It is really hard to help your own child sometimes. As a parent, I know that. And it can turn into a battle really quickly.
Yeah.
And especially with teenagers, that's a different dynamic. So one strategy that parents can try is, once you've given them some direction, maybe put on a timer for 10 minutes and leave the room, and come back at the end of that 10 minutes and check on their progress. Give them some space to work it out, and diffuse some of that tension without abandoning them. You're there to support them, but you're giving them a little bit of space, and then maybe eventually that 10 minutes turns into 20 minutes, and then 30 minutes, and so on.
At our house, we have a 30-year-old who has been through university and finished, and he's off in the work world. And I have a 14-year-old. And so I've been there, I've done that, and I'm doing it all over again at this high school level. And one of the things, and this is something that I've done with my students for many years, is that we will work on a shared Google Doc so that we can collaborate, but I'm not hovering over their shoulder. We're not sharing a computer. We could be in different rooms even. We could be at the opposite end of a table. It just, that physical, giving a little bit of space, that physical space can often diffuse the tension. And then that way I can make a suggestion and I can see how they are responding to that suggestion and where they're making their changes. I've even done it. I mean, when my son wasn't at home and he was working on an essay, we would do it over the phone. So I'd be on the phone, he'd be on the phone, he'd have his Google Doc, I'd have my Google Doc, he'd be in the library, and we could work that way. And I found that doing it when he wasn't in the house was sometimes much easier than when he was in the house, and the product was much better. So give us a little bit of space. Okay. These types of modeling and questioning, it really does make a difference, I think, over time in a child's writing. And being compassionate in the comments, but questioning and having conversations without judgment, I think, is the key to help move things along and to keep the conversation open. Absolutely.
And, in the professional writing world, professional writers have teams of people helping them, so this is not a process that we have to do independently all on. I mean, we want to foster independence, certainly, but asking for feedback on a piece of writing is something that we all need. Professional writers have a first reader that they will give their text to when it's still in the vulnerable stage, and they just want a little bit of guidance, and all the way up to the editing, the professional editor who's going to work on the nitty-gritty pieces.
I agree. Sometimes it's hard to convince our students of that, and they don't want to share. But I think little by little, if they feel successful and their writing product is stronger because of that sharing, then it leads to more sharing. So we want to make that a safe space for them to share. So here's a controversial question. What about spelling? Should this be an area of focus, and when?
So spelling is part of editing. Like other writing conventions, I think it's best addressed during the editing stage. If we are hyper focusing on spelling too early in the process, that can be really paralyzing and counterproductive. If we're getting a spelling correction every time we put something on the page, who would want to write? And it goes back to catching them doing something good first, and focusing on big ideas first, and then we're going to narrow the focus of our revision and editing down to those writing conventions. So we teach students to look for things in the revision and especially the editing stages of the writing process, things like spelling, capitalization, punctuation. So parents can help their students with editing checklists and tools such as spell check or Grammarly or read and write, like we talked about, to support this process. So for example, read and write's read back feature will read the student's work out loud, and it will highlight the text as it's read. And the student can focus on listening for areas that need editing.
I think that's great. So are there any other great tech tools that you would use or recommend as supports?
So one of the things that students can use to help with their citations, their works cited and reference lists, are bibliography generators. We have to use these with caution, and we still have to pay attention to the formatting guidelines that the teacher has given, because they're not perfect, but they're a great start. This is a tedious, very detail-oriented process of formatting your list of sources according to a specific format. So this can be a good source for helping students with that.
Oh my gosh, when I found out that this was available, like, again, it blew my mind, because I cannot tell you how many hours, painstaking hours I found in university having to make sure I had all the commas and all the dots and the pieces in the right place. And I'm pleased. I'm very pleased. But as you said, use with caution, because you want to make sure that it is correct. Okay, so speaking of technology, I think that we should have a very quick discussion, like a 2-minute discussion about Chat GPT, which, for those of you who don't know, it's a new type of technology where you can ask it a question. It's a chat box. You can ask it a question. It has access to the internet, and it can come up with and generate written material to be used in advertising, essays, different idea generation. It can be used in a multitude of ways, and it is going to change the way that students do their writing. I think it's going to change it in the way that, spell check changed things. And we don't know what the implications of it are going to be yet, but I can tell you that the universities and the professors that I talk to and the administrators in schools are all talking about it, because we don't know how it's going to affect the work that our students do. We have an idea, but we're not sure. What are your thoughts?
So the teachers, again, teachers are certainly talking about this and looking at what are the implications, both positive and negative, of this new technology. So I think, I was experimenting with it last week, and I asked it to write a 5-paragraph essay on the theme of revenge in William Shakespeare's Hamlet, and it did it in about 5 minutes. Was it a fabulous essay? No, but if I'm a high school writer and I'm struggling with writing and it's basically produced my finished product, I can see why that is tempting. So obviously there's a plagiarism issue that teachers are going to address, but that's also not a new issue. We've just got a new format with which to plagiarize. So one thing that we're seeing a lot more of, because of those concerns, is in-class assessment. So that is, I think, one way that teachers and schools are going to respond to this technology. So rather than taking the essay home to write, writing it in a timed session in class, or writing it perhaps over a process of a week in class. We've been talking also about how to incorporate this tool to help students understand writing structure. So we've been talking at RLS a little bit about, can it be used to generate models? We talk about the importance of modeling and looking at an exemplar paragraph. Can can it be used to generate a model that the student could then use and to analyze, what is working about this? What would you change about this? And maybe take some of the structural elements from that. I think it's also going to probably, I'm anticipating that teachers are going to respond in terms of the types of questions, the types of assessments that they're asking their students to complete. So for example, that 5-paragraph theme essay, ChatGPT can complete in 5 minutes, but a more sophisticated multi-step project is not something that it's going to be able to do for a student. So I think teachers are going to have to start thinking, and are obviously already thinking about, how does this change the nature of assessment, and what kinds of products am I asking my students to create, and what kind of critical thinking skills are involved that ChatGPT is not capable of.
You know what, we could have a whole other conversation just about ChatGPT, but I want to carry on with our theme for the evening. So much of our understanding of the writing process has been deepened through the creation of our group classes. And we've created many group classes at Ruth Max Learning Space based on this idea of the writing process, breaking it down into very small bits, creating a scaffolded approach so that kids are learning something, a piece, they're mastering it, they move on to the next. We include all sorts of activities and fun stuff to keep it engaging. And we've referred to them a lot through our time on the webinar. Can you tell us briefly a little bit more about them, just so that our listeners know what's available?
Sure. So we have a series of writing programs that we can run. It's our power writing series that we can run in a group class setting or one-to-one. We have our power sentences and our power paragraphs for our younger learners. Our power paragraphs class is actually running next week during March break. And we still do have some spots available for that. So if parents on this webinar have younger children and want to join that class, please give us a call. We have for our older learners, we have our persuasive power program and our power essays programs. So persuasive paragraphs was designed for our middle school learners who've solidified paragraph structure, but now are being asked to write persuasively. So, create an argument and support it and explain it. And then we have our essay programs for our high school learners. So we have our opinion essay program, which was designed for students in grades 6 to 9 who are learning the essay structure. And then we have our literary and research essay programs for students in high school in grades 9 to 12 who are being asked to write specific types of persuasive essays.
And you know what? I love them all, actually. Each one of them they're so unique and they're different. And we really do dive deep into that process, and kids leave. I mean, the best comments that we get are when kids not only feel good about the writing they produced with us, but they take those models and they take that learning and all the templates that we provide, and they start to apply it in their classrooms or on their own. That's the best compliment to us, I think. So, all right, we have some time for questions. And before we wrap up for the evening and talk about our takeaways, I would love if our participants would take a moment and put one thing in the chat that they found interesting, that they might be able to use at home, and or a question that you have for us. We do have a few questions that we want to answer from before, people who've written in their questions. So just take a moment, and I would love to know what you're taking away from this evening. What was one thing that you heard that made sense or made a connection, or maybe there was a little aha moment, or something that you can actually turn around and use with your kids? I'd love to hear it. And while you're doing that, I am going to answer a couple of questions. So one question we had was, what are the best ways to have children practice their writing skills? And that question is a little bit broad, because writing skills could mean the physical writing skills, but I think it means more about their creative writing skills and just practicing the pieces that we're talking about. One thing I would say, journaling is a good way to do it. Having a prompt. A lot of kids have a hard time writing when they don't have any direction. So finding an interesting newspaper article, a quote, an idiom, finding something that spurs them on and giving them maybe 10 minutes, 15 minutes. Stream of consciousness writing, that type of thing. What are your thoughts?
So one thing I hear all the time from my middle grade and especially high school writers is that writing really feels like a chore. Writing for school really feels like a chore and something that they don't have a lot of choice with, maybe in terms of topics or just structures. So I think I think we want to kind of normalize regular writing. And as we said, the more we practice writing and the more writing in a low stakes way becomes part of our lives, the better. So things, and also I think young writers want to have a purpose for writing that's relevant to them. So that might be journaling, that might be, writing a product review on, you've just ordered a product and, we can do this online now. Maybe you're writing a review of a product that you just received. Or, I know that sending letters, which I still do, makes me very old fashioned,
Good for you.
A postcard on family vacation, that's a pretty low stakes kind of fun way to write. Or, if you send out a family newsletter around the holidays, getting your children to contribute to that. Or there are lots of contests and, writers spaces for young writers on the internet that offer things like contests or tell us your opinion on this issue. So writing that is relevant to their lives in some way and that allows them some choice in what they say and how they say it, I think is also great practice.
I think the relevant, that's the thing, the key that hits me. It's got to be relevant. So another person asked us earlier, help how to get my teenager to write and edit and prepare for university level writing. And I think the short answer is really that writing process and being with them at each stage of that writing process. And I see that Alicia has said, thank you so much. I realize I need to help more and be more hands-on to help. I love the idea of spending a lot of time on the pre-work. I'm excited to look into Mindomo, really helpful. And I think those two things kind of match up because the idea that parents may have to be a bit more involved in order to get their kids up to speed and to give them the confidence. And I find that, there's some English teachers or social science teachers, there's some teachers in the classroom who will spend a lot of time with feedback. But by the time you get to grade 11 and 12, there's no time. A teacher just doesn't have the time to give 30 or 60 or 90, depending on how many essays they have to mark, individual feedback. And so either you take it into your own hands as a parent, or you look for some outside help. That's what we do, or a combination of both. And then it becomes a team effort. So thank you, Alicia, for commenting on that, because I think it's it can actually, if it's done in a relaxed, as you said, low stakes way, and the frustration is kind of under control, it can actually be a very bonding experience with your kids, looking into new topics that maybe you don't know about, but they know more about, and you're learning from them as you go. So I've got one other question here. It says they're looking for grade 7 materials, exercises to inspire more detailed work and improve grades. I would say, it really, really depends if you're here on this call or you're watching this on the replay. It really depends on the needs of your child and what their learning style is, where they're having challenges, where things come naturally or easily. I would say there's lots of stuff on the web you can find. If you're looking for something that is very structured and very systematic, those are the types of programs that we provide, whether it's the persuasive paragraph writing or the opinion essay for grade 7, I think would be a good place to start. Anyway, we have another one. Dr. Nimchanok says, I wonder if there are more standalone workshop offerings for students who may have a busy athletic schedule, e.g. we are around next week for March break for hockey, but there are gaps in the schedule that would benefit from some structured learning. Yes, absolutely. And I would say, just give us a call. You can go on the website. I think we put our information up there already, ruthrumack.com, and just add that you would like to have a conversation, and then one of our wonderful teachers or directors of education, associate directors of education, will have a personal conversation with you, and we can work something out. So the workshop offerings, we do have the group classes that run at certain times, but we also have something that I like to call BYOG, which is bring your own group. If you have 2, 3, 4 students, 6 students that all want to work on the same thing, Or if you just want to have your child come in one-to-one, then we can create the curriculum based on their needs as well as based on their schedule. So yes, we're very open to that. And we would love to have a further conversation for you and find out, what we can do to help. Well, any other questions? You have us. We are all ears. We would love to answer any other questions. If you've got any other questions, put them in the chat. You can always, as I said, contact us at ruthrumac.com or pick up the phone. We actually do answer the phone. And if we don't answer it right away, we call you back as soon as we can. And we would love to continue this conversation. Paula, thank you so much for all the expertise, all the insight, all the tips and the tricks and the strategies. And you're just a wealth of information. And it's been amazing chatting with you this evening.
Well, thank you so much. It was really great to be here. Thank you.
Well, thank you everyone for joining us. And we will stick around for a moment. If you want to talk to us privately, we can wait till we've shut down. But other than that, have a lovely evening. Oh, and join us for our next webinar, which will be when? What's our next one? It's Parent Power. This is about navigating the school system for students who have particular special needs who've been identified or need to be identified. And it's in April. So look for that. We'll be sending you more information about that as well. Thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful evening. Anybody who's got a question is welcome to stick around. Dun, da, da. Nope. Okay. There's still 2 people. I see you, Karen. Do you have anything you want to ask? I'm talking to you.
No
All right.
pressure.
Well, we're gonna close it down for the evening. Thanks, everybody, and I'll speak to everyone soon.